"I regret nothing but losing you," Mafia boss said as he found her. Crying beside the river, her name was Abigail Martin now. It was a plain name, a name that tasted like dust, and it was the safest thing she owned. Abigail Martin worked at a small flower shop in the Iron Cross district, a part of Blackridge that the skyline had forgotten. The shop smelled of damp earth, cut stems, and the sweet, cloying rot of lilies that were past their prime. She kept her head down, her voice soft, and paid her rent in cash at a cramped apartment building where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing, cooking and crying. Ava Delaney, the woman she used to be, was gone. Abigail, or Ava, as she still thought of herself in the quiet, terrified moments before sleep, was 6 months pregnant. It was a secret she guarded with a fierce, primal desperation, a secret held tight beneath the loose smock she wore to work, a constant, dull ache in her lower back and a life fluttering beneath her ribs that felt like both a miracle and a death sentence. She would stand for hours, her hands submerged in cold water, stripping thorns from rose stems, the repetitive motion a kind of prayer. The shop owner, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Petrov, thought her new assistant was just quiet. She did not see the terror that spiked in Ava's chest every time the shop bell tinkled, or the way Ava's eyes scanned every man who paused on the sidewalk for just a second too long. The shop was quiet today. The afternoon light, thick with dust motes, slanted across the buckets of baby's breath. The scent of eucalyptus was sharp, and for a moment, it cut through the smell of the lilies. But the lilies always won. Their scent, heavy and funereal, dragged her back, pulling her down into the life she had fled. It smelled just like the Onyx Club. Matteo Moretti's club had been steeped in the scent of expensive lilies, whiskey, and the metallic tang of old money. Ava had been a waitress there, one of dozens, but she had been different. She learned later that he had noticed her on her very first night. She had been clearing glasses from a corner booth when a man, drunk on power and expensive scotch, grabbed her wrist. He was not a gangster, just a wealthy patron who thought he owned everything in the room, including the staff. The air in the club solidified. The music seemed to faint. Everyone was watching, waiting for the inevitable explosion from the mezzanine where Matteo sat, shrouded in shadow. Ava had not cried out. She had not panicked. She had simply stopped, turned her head slowly, and looked the man directly in the eye. Her voice, quiet but carrying, had been simple. "Please let go of my arm," the man, stunned by the lack of fear, had faltered. A moment later, 2 of Matteo's men had descended, lifting the patron from his seat as if he weighed nothing. Matteo had not moved from the mezzanine. He just watched her. She had smoothed her uniform, picked up the tray, and continued working, her hands perfectly steady. She had not been intimidated by him, and in his world, that made her curious. He, who could silence a room with a glance, had no effect on the quiet waitress with the sad eyes and the steady hands. Their romance had not been a whirlwind. It had been a slow burn, unfolding in stolen moments in the hours just before dawn. It began 2 weeks after the incident at the booth. He had found her in the staff kitchen, long after close, rubbing her feet. He had not spoken, just walked to the industrial stove, pushed aside a stack of supply invoices, and started cooking. He made her aglio e olio, simple pasta with garlic and oil in a heavy sauté pan, his movements precise. He, the most feared man in Blackridge, served her on a mismatched plate at 3 a.m. He never asked her about her life. She never asked about him. Their language became one of small, quiet actions. He would leave a heavy coat draped over her locker on cold nights. She started keeping a small, discreet first aid kit in her bag. One night, he had come to her small, one-room apartment long after the club had closed. He had a deep, ugly cut over his eyebrow, his knuckles raw and split. It was the first time she had seen him bleed. He sat on her threadbare sofa, a titan crammed into her tiny, normal life, and let her clean the wounds. He flinched when the antiseptic touched his skin, but his eyes never left her face. She'd been so close she could smell the cold night air on his skin and the faint, iron scent of his blood. You should be afraid of me. Ava, he murmured, his voice rough. She had finished placing the small bandage over his brow, her fingers light. You are just a man. Mateo, you bleed just like everyone else. He had captured her hand then, not forcefully, but with a possessive grip that sent a shock straight through her. He turned his head and pressed his lips to the center of her palm, a gesture of such aching, unexpected tenderness that it had undone her completely. He had stared at her, his dark eyes vulnerable for a split second before the mask of the boss slammed back down. That was the man she had fallen in love with, the man who cooked pasta in the dead of night, the man who bled, the man who looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world of shadows. But the shadows were real, and they were hungry. The night it all shattered began with the sound of breaking glass. It was a Tuesday, usually a slow night. Ava had been polishing wine glasses behind the main bar, the low thrum of jazz washing over the room. Then the front doors of the Onyx Club exploded inward. It was not a raid, it was an invasion. Men in dark tactical gear, faces covered, swarmed in. These were not police. They carried weapons that were heavy, military grade, the Sarkovs, Mateo's rivals. Ava dove behind the solid mahogany bar just as the first shots erupted. The sound was deafening, not the clean pops of movies, but wet, tearing booms that echoed off the marble and velvet. Screams were cut short, the air filled with the smell of cordite and copper. She had curled into a ball, hands over her head, her world reduced to the smell of spilled beer and polished wood. The fight was short, brutal and decisive. When a sudden, terrible silence fell, she dared to look. Mateo was standing in the center of the room, untouched. He was not the man who had cooked for her. He was not the man who bled. He was breathing heavily, his suit immaculate, but his eyes were empty. They were voids. A surviving Sarkov man was crawling toward the door, choking, one hand outstretched. Mateo had walked over to him, his steps measured. He had knelt, not in mercy but in judgment. Ava could not hear what he said, but she saw the man's eyes widen in absolute, primal terror. Mateo had moved with swift, inhuman violence. It was brutal. It was final. He had ended the man's life without a flicker of emotion, as if he were simply turning off a light. He had stood up, fixing his cuffs, his face a mask of cold, distant fury, and then his eyes had found her. Still crouched behind the bar, the man she loved was gone. In his place was this thing, a monster made of tailored suits and inhuman calm. He took a step toward her, his hand slightly outstretched, his expression shifting, the ice in his eyes cracking, revealing the man beneath. But she could not unsee what she had just seen. Terrified, overwhelmed, and emotionally shattered, she had scrambled out from behind the bar and fled through the staff exit. She ran all the way back to her apartment, her lungs burning. She had grabbed the backpack she always kept half-packed, a habit from a childhood spent in foster care. She took the $3,000 she had saved, her fake ID, and nothing else. She had not left a note. She had not said goodbye. She had taken the first bus leaving the city, heading anywhere, and had not looked back. That had been 7 months ago. Now, in the present day. Matteo Moretti sat in his office, high above the glittering, corrupt heart of Blackridge. The room was dark, paneled in wood so old it looked black. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on his desk, sweating onto a stack of financial reports. He was staring at a single, grainy photograph. It had been taken from a security camera across the street from a flower shop in Iron Cross. It was a woman with dark hair pulled back, her face partially obscured, her body hidden by a loose coat. But he knew the way she moved. He knew the tilt of her head. It was her, his lieutenant. Leo stood by the window, his arms crossed. Leo was his oldest friend, the only man who had been with him since the beginning. "It's been months, Matteo," Leo said, his voice reasonable. "She's gone. She made her choice. Let her go." Matteo's voice was dangerously quiet. "She is in my city. And that makes her a target," Leo countered, turning from the window. "If we know she's here, how long until the Sarkovs know? How long until every rival you have decides to use her as leverage? She is a weakness. Boss, You, of all people, cannot afford a weakness." Mateo's hand clenched around the photograph, crinkling the image. "She is not a weakness." "She is," Leo insisted, his loyalty forcing him to speak the truth. "She's a civilian. She's vulnerable. The night of the club raid, she saw you. The real you. And she ran. What makes you think she wants to be found?" Mateo stood, the movement sudden and violent, sweeping the whiskey glass from his desk. It shattered against the far wall. "She does not get a choice," Leo sighed. He knew that tone. It was the tone Mateo used just before he burned something, or someone, to the ground. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find her." "And then what? Drag her back here? Chain her to the penthouse? She is not one of us. Mateo, you cannot protect her from what you are." "Get out, Leo," Mateo whispered. Leo hesitated, then nodded sharply and left, closing the heavy doors with a soft, final click. Mateo walked to the window. The city lights blurred below him. He could not forget her. He had tried. For months, he had drowned himself in work, in violence, in the cold, empty pursuit of power. But every night, he still woke up smelling garlic and oil, his palm still tingling where she had touched him. He could not send his men. They were clumsy. They were loud. They would be seen. If he was going to find her, he had to do it himself, quietly. He had to move through the city not as a boss, but as a ghost. He had to hunt for the only thing he had ever truly lost. Back in Ironcross, Ava locked the door of the flower shop. Mrs. Petrov had let her leave early. The fainting spells were getting worse. She had been arranging a funeral wreath when the room had suddenly tilted. The smell of the lilies had become suffocating. A thick, sweet poison in the air. She had gripped the edge of the metal counter, her vision narrowing to a pinprick of light, before sliding to the floor. She had woken to Mrs. Petrov's panicked face, a damp cloth on her forehead. Now. She walked the few blocks to the clinic, her hand pressed against the swell of her belly. The doctor, a tired, overworked woman in the low-income clinic, had been blunt. "Your blood pressure is too high, Abigail. You are not eating enough, and your stress levels are through the roof. You are entering a critical phase of the pregnancy. You need to rest. You need to take care of yourself. This baby is in a precarious position." Ava had just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She left the clinic as the sun was setting, the sky turning a bruised, chemical purple. She pulled her thin coat tighter. The paranoia, always simmering just beneath her skin, began to prickle. She felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. It was a feeling she remembered all too well from her time at the Onyx Club. It was the feeling of a predator's eyes on your back. She paused at the corner, pretending to look in the window of a closed pawn shop. In the reflection, she saw it. A dark sedan, parked halfway down the block. It was too clean for this neighborhood. The windows were tinted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She began to walk faster, her breath catching in her throat. She turned the corner onto her street, her keys already in her hand. She heard a car door open. Far behind her, she did not look back. She ran up the 3 steps to her building, fumbled with the lock, and threw herself inside, slamming the heavy door shut. She leaned against it, her body trembling, one hand protectively on her stomach. She waited, listening, for the sound of footsteps on the stairs, for a knock, for the splintering of her door. But there was nothing. Only the distant sound of a siren and the smell of her neighbors frying onions. She was not safe. She had never been safe. She had run from the monster, but she was still in his city, and she was carrying his child. Matteo Moretti did not make requests. He made demands. He was standing in the cramped, brightly lit living room of an apartment in a neighborhood slightly better than Ironcross, but still leagues below his own. The air smelled of vanilla-scented candles and burnt toast. Chloe, Ava's former roommate, was trembling so hard she could barely hold the mug of water she had poured for herself. She had opened her door to find him there, a man who looked like he had been carved from shadow and expensive wool, and her world had tilted. "I told you, I do not know where she is," Chloe insisted, her voice high and thin. "She left. 7 months ago. She just packed a bag, and she was gone. No note, no call, nothing. Mateo's eyes, flat and dark, swept the room. It was a messy, civilian life. Piles of magazines, colorful cushions, a half-dead plan in the corner. He was not here for conversation. He had already had his men scan her financials and tap her phone. She was clean, but Ava might have left something physical. A clue, a breadcrumb. You were her friend, Mateo stated. It was an accusation. I am. If she was in trouble, I would help her. But she did not ask for help. She just ran. Mateo ignored her, walking into the small bedroom. Chloe yelped, following him. You cannot just... He opened a closet. Dresses, shoes, clutter. He moved to the small wooden desk, cluttered with makeup brushes and unpaid bills. His gaze landed on a small velvet jewelry box, the kind that holds a cheap ring. Chloe saw where he was looking. That is mine. He picked it up. Inside, nestled on the faded lining, was a single, smooth gray riverstone. It was unremarkable, the size of a thumb, polished by water. The air in Mateo's lungs turned to ice. He remembered the day, a rare afternoon stolen from the city, hours north, where the air was clean. They had walked by a fast-moving river. Ava, her shoes off, her laughter real and unguarded, had picked it up. For your desk, she had said, pressing it into his palm. So you remember, there is a world outside of all that. He had kept it in his pocket for a week, a secret weight. He must have left it at her apartment, and she had left it here when she fled. She told me to throw it away, Chloe whispered, seeing the look on his face. She said it meant nothing, but I could not. It felt important. Mateo's fingers closed around the stone, the smooth, cold surface biting into his skin. His mask of indifference did not crack, but something behind his eyes shifted. A fracture. He had been hunting a ghost, but this stone was real. It was proof. He turned, the stone disappearing into his pocket, a sudden, cold weight against his hip. If you hear from her, he said, his voice a low command, you will call me. He placed a card on the desk. It was black, with only a 10-digit number. He was gone, leaving Chloe to collapse onto her bed, her breath sobbing in the vanilla-scented air. Ava, meanwhile, felt the paranoia of the previous night cling to her like the damp chill of the morning. She had forced herself to go to work. Mrs. Petrov was kind, but she could not afford to lose this job. Not now. She worked through the day in a haze, her hands arranging bright carnations and dark green ferns while her mind raced. The car, the feeling of being watched. She had convinced herself, in the thin light of dawn, that she was imagining it, that it was the pregnancy, the stress. She left the shop just as dusk was turning the streets a deep, bruised blue. She clutched her purse, the strap wrapped twice around her wrist. She avoided the main streets, thinking the smaller alleys would be faster, safer. It was a mistake. The alley was narrow, smelling of wet cardboard and old grease. 2 men emerged from the shadows of a recessed doorway, blocking her path. They were young, their eyes hollow. They needed a palpable, dangerous thing. Just the bag, lady, the first one said, pulling a small, rusty knife. And the coat looks warm. Ava's blood ran cold. She backed away, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. Please, I do not have any money. Everyone has money, the second one sneered. Grabbing her arm, Ava cried out, a thin, terrified sound, trying to twist away. The man yanked her forward and she stumbled, her ankle turning. It happened faster than her mind could process. There was a sound, not of a fight, but of an impact, a heavy, dense thud, like a side of beef hitting concrete. The man holding her arm released her with a choked gasp, his eyes wide with surprise. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even landed. The first man, the one with the knife, froze. A third figure now stood in the alley, a man in a dark, perfectly tailored suit, his face impassive. He had appeared from nowhere, a wraith of impossible speed. The man with the knife lunged, a desperate, clumsy move. The stranger did not even seem to exert himself. He caught the man's wrist, twisted it. A sharp, wet snap echoed in the narrow space, followed by a scream that was cut short as the stranger's other hand struck the man's throat. The man collapsed, gagging and clutching his neck. The entire encounter had taken less than 5 seconds. The suited man straightened his tie. He looked at Ava, who was pressed against the brick wall, her heart trying to escape her chest. His eyes were cold, assessing. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming a task was complete. Then, he turned and melted back into the shadows he had come from. He was simply gone. Ava stood there, shaking, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The two men on the ground were groaning. She knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones like lead, that this was no random savior. That was Mateo's protection. The car had been real. He was not just watching, he was intervening. She scrambled out of the alley, running, her turned ankle screaming in protest. She did not stop until she was inside her apartment, the deadbolt thrown, the chain secured. He was pulling her back in. The monster she had fled was now her self-appointed guardian, casting his shadow over her new, fragile life. She leaned against the door, sliding down to the floor, and for the first time, she let the terror and the confusion wash over her. She hated him for what he was, but a part of her, a deep, traitorous part, felt a flicker of the old safety. He had kept the other monsters at bay. That night, she did not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, the sounds of the city muted, and her mind betrayed her. It drifted back, past the night of the gunfire and the blood, to a different night, a night of rain and quiet vulnerability. It had been their first time. The memory was so vivid it ached. It had been in his penthouse, a place that felt more like a fortress than a home, all glass and cold marble. Rain had lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city a glittering, wet jewel below. She'd been nervous, her hands trembling as she held a glass of water he had given her. He, too, had been hesitant. This man who moved with such lethal certainty, who commanded rooms with his silence, seemed unsure. He had stood a few feet away, watching her. He had taken off his suit jacket, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the corded muscle of his forearms. "You are shaking." "Ava," he had said, his voice soft, rough. "So are you," she whispered back. He had looked at his own hands, larger and scarred, and flexed them, as if surprised to find them unsteady. He had crossed the space between them slowly. He did not touch her, not at first. He just stood in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I do not know how to do this," he had confessed, his eyes locked on hers. "I know how to take it. I do not know how to be gentle." "You are doing fine," she had said, her fear melting into something else. She had been the one to move first, reaching out and placing her small hand on his chest, over his heart. She felt the heavy, solid beat beneath her palm. He had closed his eyes, his breath hitching, and covered her hand with his own. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, not at first. It was a kiss of seeking, of desperation, of a profound and starving loneliness. It was slow, tender, and careful. He tasted expensive whiskey and a sadness so deep it terrified her. His hands, those dangerous, calloused hands, had moved to her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones as if she were made of spun glass. He had lifted her, his strength effortless, and carried her to his bed, there, in the dark, with the storm raging outside. He had been achingly careful. He had undressed her slowly, his gaze worshipful, his touch light, almost reverent. He had kissed her shoulders, her collarbone, the inside of her wrist. And when he finally came inside her, it was with a control that was almost painful, a slow, deliberate merging that felt less like an act of lust and more like a man finally coming home. He had never touched anyone so carefully. She had never been so completely seen. Ava woke from the memory with a sob, her face wet with tears. The longing was a physical pain, a hollowness in her chest that competed with the life in her womb. She missed the man who had cooked for her, the man who had touched her like she was sacred. How could he be the same man who had executed another in cold blood? The next morning, she knew she could not hide. She could not work. She was a prisoner in her own life, and he was the warden. She went downstairs, her legs unsteady. She needed milk. She needed to feel the normal world for just a moment. She pushed open the heavy front door of her building and froze. He was there. Matteo Moretti was leaning against the stone railing of her building's front steps, as if he had been waiting for her. He was not in a car. He was not in shadow. He was just there, in the pale morning light, his face drawn, his dark overcoat making him look larger than life. Ava's breath caught. Every nerve in her body screamed. He saw her and straightened, taking a small step toward her. Ava. Her name, in his voice, after all these months, was a physical blow. The shock turned instantly to a hot, bright rage. This was her life, her safe, quiet, anonymous life, and he had just burned it to the ground by standing here. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "Get away from me. You cannot be here." "Please," he said, and the words sounded foreign on his tongue. He held up his hands, palms out, a gesture of surrender that looked foreign on him. "Just let me talk to you. For 1 minute. I have nothing to say to you. You need to leave. Now." She tried to push past him, but he moved, blocking her path. "Ava, I know what you saw," he said, his voice low and desperate. He reached out, his gloved fingers gently touching her arm. "That night, at the club, that was not— I never wanted you to see that. I never wanted that to be part of your world." The touch was electric. It was the same hand from her dream, the same hand that had been so tender, but now it felt like a brand. All the fear, the grief, the 7 months of running, the lonely nights, the terror of the pregnancy, it all coalesced into a single, blinding point of impact. Ava slapped him. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet morning street. It was not a weak, hysterical gesture. It was a full, stinging blow that snapped his head to the side. They both froze, stunned. Ava's hand stung, her chest heaving. Matteo slowly turned his head back to look at her. His cheek was bright red. His eyes were not angry. They were broken. That look, more than any violence, shattered her resolve. Overwhelmed. She turned and fled, scrambling back into her building, slamming the door. She fumbled with the lock, her tears blinding her, and ran up the stairs, not stopping until she was back inside her room. The door chained. Matteo stood on the sidewalk for a long time, his hand on his cheek, the sting of her palm fading, replaced by a cold, hollowing ache. He saw, in that brief, violent moment, the way her coat had pulled tight, he saw the undeniable swell of her belly. He got into his car, parked a block away, where Leo was waiting. Leo saw the red mark on his boss's face and wisely said nothing. "She is pregnant," Matteo said, his voice devoid of emotion. Leo closed his eyes. "Matteo, this changes everything." "It changes nothing," Matteo replied, his voice hard. "She is a target, and now so is the child. Put a man on her door. Not watching. On her. I want him in her hallway. I do not care if she sees him. I do not care if she likes it. No one gets near her." That night, Ava sat on her floor, clutching a small, faded photograph she had kept hidden in the lining of her suitcase. It was from that day by the river. They were laughing. He looked young. She looked happy. She cried over the ghost of the man she had loved and the monster he had become. She must have dozed off, her head against the wall, because a sound startled her awake. Slip. It was the sound of paper sliding across the wooden floor. She held her breath, creeping toward the door. A small, white envelope lay on the floor. Her hands shook as she picked it up. There was no name. She opened it. Inside was a single piece of heavy cardstock. 3 words were written in black, precise ink. "I'm still here." The note was a promise and a threat, signed with the invisible ink of his power. "I'm still here." Ava had not left her apartment in 2 days. A man sat in the hallway outside her door. He was not one of Matteo's usual, broad-shouldered enforcers. This one was older, with tired eyes, and he never made a sound. He just existed, a human deadbolt between her and the world. She was a prisoner in a cell of her own choosing. And now he had posted a guard. On the third morning, the phone rang, her cheap, landline-only wall phone. She had not given the number to anyone. She stared at it, her heart leaping into her throat. It rang 4 times. 5, 6. She finally snatched it up. "Hello? Miss Martin. Abigail Martin." The voice was a kind, professional woman. "This is Nurse Jameson from the Iron Cross Clinic. I'm so glad I caught you. We had a donation. A specialist, a high-risk obstetrician, is doing a 1-day charitable consultation at an uptown facility. We have an opening in 1 hour. It is a full screening, ultrasound, everything. Can you make it?" Ava's blood ran cold. "A donation?" "Yes. From a private philanthropic fund. It is all very last minute." "But your file was flagged as high priority. It is an amazing opportunity. Dear, the facility is at St. Jude's Plaza." Suspicion was a bitter taste in her mouth. This was him. It had to be. A charitable consultation at one of the most expensive medical centers in the city. He was not just watching, he was scheduling. Yes, Ava said, her hand tightening on the receiver. "I will be there." She hung up, her mind racing. This was a violation. This was him inserting himself into the most private, terrifying part of her life. But the terror for her baby, the doctor's warning at the clinic, was stronger than her pride. When she opened her apartment door, the man in the hall stood. He did not look at her, but simply followed her. 5 paces behind, down the stairs, a black town car, not the tinted window sedan, was waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door for her. She got in. The clinic was not a clinic. It was a spa, all brushed steel, white orchids, and the sound of soft, moving water. A woman at a glass desk smiled at her. "Abigail Martin, we are ready for you." The doctor was a woman with kind eyes and brutally efficient hands. She was, as promised, the best. She moved with a calm authority that Ava had not seen since Mateo. For 45 minutes. Ava was not a fugitive. She was just a patient. And then, the sound. A rhythmic, rapid whoosh, 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 amplified by the machine, filling the silent, sterile room. It was the sound of a tiny, furious heart. Ava's breath hitched, and a tear escaped, rolling hot into her hairline. It was the first time the baby had felt real, not as a secret or a consequence, but as a life. The doctor smiled, her eyes soft. A very strong heartbeat, 150 beats per minute. "Everything looks perfect. Miss Martin, you're just a little underweight, but the baby is doing beautifully." Ava left the examination room in a daze, her hand flat against her belly, feeling the phantom echo of that sound. She walked to the glass desk, pulling her small, worn wallet from her purse. "I need to pay." The receptionist smiled, a polite, dismissive expression. "There is no copay. Miss Martin, your visit has been taken care of." "By who?" Ava's voice was too sharp. The smile faltered. "By the fund, ma'am. It was handled anonymously." Anonymous. The word was a slap. He had bought her body, her child's health, as easily as he bought whiskey or silence. The fragile peace of the last hour shattered, replaced by a cold, simmering fury. She was moved, yes, deep in a place she did not want to acknowledge. He had given her the sound of her child's heart. But he had also proven that she, and this baby, were just another one of his possessions. She did not have the driver take her back to the apartment. "Stop here," she ordered, her voice hard. As they passed the end of her street, the driver pulled over. She got out. The guard, in the passenger seat, made a move to follow. "Do not," she snapped, with a venom that surprised herself. She did not go to her building. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold, gray afternoon, and she waited. She knew he would come. The guard was on his phone. He appeared 10 minutes later, not in a car, but on foot, emerging from the alleyway across the street. He had been close. He was always close. He crossed the street, his long overcoat billowing, his face an impassive mask. He stopped a few feet from her, giving her space. "You are cold," he said. It was not a question. "Do not talk to me about the weather, Mateo." Her voice was low, vibrating with rage. "The doctor, the bodyguard, the car. You think you can just buy me, buy my baby?" You think you can throw money at this and fix it?" He was silent, his dark eyes searching her face. "Whoa, what do you want from me?" she cried, her hands fisting at her sides. "You want me to be grateful? You want me to come back to the Onyx Club and pour drinks while you end people?" "No," he said, his voice rough. "Then what?" she screamed, and the word was torn from her. A raw, ragged sound. "What could you possibly want?" Matteo took a step closer, and the raw power coming off him was suffocating. But his eyes were not cold. They were hollowed out, filled with a terrible, aching void. "Everything," he whispered, and the word was barely audible over the sound of the city traffic. "Everything I never had." The answer was so unexpected, so bare, that it knocked the breath from her. He was not talking about power or money. He was talking about the sound in that room, the heartbeat. "I know you are pregnant, Ava," he said, his voice quiet. He was not asking, he was confirming. The anger, the righteous fury that had held her together, suddenly dissolved, leaving her knees weak. The secret she had carried alone for so long, a shield and a terror, was now in the open, hanging in the cold air between them. "He's not a fund," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's not a donation. He's a baby." She looked at this man, this killer, this monster who had just given her the one thing she needed, and she broke. She bent forward, a sob tearing through her, her body too weak to hold the weight of her fear. Matteo moved, his arms coming around her, pulling her against his chest. She resisted for a second, her fists beating uselessly against the hard wall of his coat. And then she just collapsed. She wept. She wept for the man she had loved, for the monster she had seen, for the baby that deserved more than a life on the run. He did not speak. He just held her. One hand cradling the back of her head, his chin resting on her hair, his body a solid, warm anchor in the middle of a city that was trying to drown her. He was her protector and her destroyer, and he was the father of her child. The truce, if it could be called that, lasted 3 days. Ava stayed in her apartment. The guard stayed in the hall. A bag of fresh groceries appeared outside her door each morning. She ate the food. She hated herself for it. The call came not to Ava, but to Matteo. As he sat in his penthouse office, staring at the gray river stone on his desk, Leo entered without knocking, his face grim. "It is the Sarkovs. They are getting bold." "What did they do?" Matteo did not look up. "They are not hitting us. Not directly. They are testing. They hit a dry cleaner in the Heights, one of Gasper's fronts, and they hit the flower shop." Matteo's head snapped up. "What?" "The flower shop in Iron Cross, the one she worked at. They torched it. Last night, threw a Molotov through the window. An old woman, the owner, got singed." Matteo stood, his chair scraping violently. The Sarkovs did not know about Ava, not specifically, but they were tracing his movements, his interests. They were looking for his weaknesses. They had found the shop. They were close. He was in motion before Leo finished speaking. "Get the car. Get the package." Ava woke from a fitful sleep. It was dark, midnight. She was thirsty. She walked into her small kitchen, her hand on her belly. A key slid into her lock. She froze, her blood turning to ice. The man in the hall, he was coming in. She backed away, grabbing a small paring knife from the dish rack. The door opened. It was not the guard. It was Matteo. He was dressed in black, his face pale, his eyes urgent. "We have to go. Now." "What? No. Get out." She held the small knife out, her hand shaking so badly it was useless. He did not even look at the knife. He walked toward her, his hands empty and open. "Ava, listen to me. There is no time. They are coming." "Who? You?" "The Sarkovs." The name was a whip crack in the small room. "They burned the flower shop last night." Ava's stomach dropped. "Mrs. Petrov, is she—" "She is alive. A few burns. They were sending a message. They know someone of interest was there. They do not know it is you. Not yet, but they are close. They are 2 steps behind me. You cannot stay here. You are not safe." The reality of his words hit her harder than a physical blow. The danger was not just him. The danger was the world he commanded, a world that had just burned an innocent old woman. He saw the fight leave her eyes, replaced by a deep, numbing fear. He was gentle then. He took the knife from her limp fingers. "I have a place, far from here. It is safe. No one knows about it. I promise you." She just nodded, numb. "Go," he said, his voice soft. "Get your bag, the one from the river." She stared at him, stunned. He even knew about the photograph. She grabbed her things. He led her out of the apartment, past the guard, who nodded once to his boss. They moved down the back stairs, into a reinforced truck in the alley. They drove for 3 hours, north, out of the city, the engine a low thrum. Ava did not speak. She watched the city lights fade, replaced by the dark, skeletal shapes of trees. They arrived at a cabin, nestled deep in the woods, built of dark stone and heavy timber. It smelled of pine and cold air. Inside, it was a fortress, but a warm one. A deep fireplace, comfortable furniture, a kitchen stocked with food. He showed her to a bedroom. "This is yours. The locks are on the inside." She woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and bacon. She found him in the kitchen, in his shirt sleeves, cooking, just like the first time. The sight of it, the simple, devastating domesticity, made her want to weep. She watched him for a long time from the doorway, this man of brutal contradictions. He turned, holding a spatula. He saw her watching him. His face was soft, tired, and full of a profound, aching regret. He looked at her messy hair, her swollen belly hidden under her thin robe, and his heart clenched. The tension of the next 2 days was unbearable. They circled each other. 2 ghosts in a house built for a life they could never have. He built fires. She read old books from the shelf. He cooked. She ate. The silence was heavy with everything they could not say. On the 3rd night, a storm hit. Rain and wind lashed the small cabin, rattling the windows. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the flickering orange glow of the fireplace. Ava jumped, a small cry escaping her. Mateo was across the room in a second. "It is just the power. The generator will kick on." But it did not. They were alone, in the dark, with the storm screaming outside. Ava was trembling, her arms wrapped around her stomach. "I am fine," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It is just dark." He knelt in front of her chair, his face illuminated by the fire. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that went deeper than the storm. "You are trembling," he said. "I'm cold." He reached out, his hand hesitating, and laid it on her knee. Her robe was thin. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the life of her and the child, just beneath his palm. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in pain. "Ava," he breathed, his voice raw. She saw the regret in his face, the open wound of it. Without thinking, she lifted her hand and touched his cheek. He was rough with stubble, his skin warm. He flinched, then leaned into her touch, his eyes opening, locking with hers. He was so close. The man who cooked pasta, the man who bled, the man who had held her as she wept on a city sidewalk. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. His lips touched hers. It was not gentle. It was not tender. It was a collision of memory, of pain, of 7 months of starvation. It tasted of ash, whiskey, and salt. It was desperate and angry, and full of a longing so profound it was a physical agony. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was the only air. His hand moved from her knee, up her side, his thumb brushing the swell of her belly. He froze. He pulled back, his breath ragged, his forehead resting against hers. "We cannot," he whispered. "I am a monster." "Ava, you said it." "I know," she whispered back, and her tears were hot on his skin. She laced her fingers behind his neck, pulling him closer. "Just for tonight, Mateo. Just for tonight." She kissed him again, and this time, there was no hesitation. It was a fall. They fell into each other, a desperate, tangled embrace on the thick rug in front of the fire. It was not about lust. It was about the unsaid pain, the need to be held, to be anchored, to feel something other than fear. He held her, his body shaking with a control she had never seen, his hands gentle but desperate, as if memorizing the shape of her. She clung to him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her sobs quiet, muffled against his chest. They did not make love. They just held on, two broken people, clinging to each in the wreckage, with the storm raging all around them. Later, wrapped in a thick blanket on the sofa, the fire burning low, Ava spoke into the quiet. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed, the words tearing out of her. "That is the truly stupid part. I saw what you did. I know what you are, but I never stopped." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "But I am still so afraid. I am afraid of you. I am afraid of them. How can I have this baby in a world like this?" Matteo looked at her, his face carved in shadow and light. He reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her tears. "I will protect you," he said, his voice a vow, hard as the stone of the fireplace. "I will protect you from the Sarkovs. I will protect you from the world." He leaned closer, his eyes holding hers, and he made the only promise that mattered. "And I will protect you from me," the promise he had made. "I will protect you from me," hung in the air of the small cabin, a fragile, hopeful thing. For a few days, it felt real. They existed in a quiet domestic bubble, insulated from the world by the thick woods and the heavy, new-fallen snow. They ate simple meals. He read by the fire while she sketched in an old notebook she had found, her hand moving over the page, drawing the trees outside the window, the shape of the fire poker, the curve of his shoulder as he sat across from her. The intimacy from the night of the storm had settled, changing the atmosphere between them. It was no longer the tense, wary circling. It was a shared, quiet space, heavy with unspoken words, but no longer hostile. He slept on the sofa, a silent, self-imposed penance. She would wake in the night and see his silhouette by the dying embers, a guardian carved from shadow. The bubble burst on the fourth morning. Matteo was on the satellite phone, the one he kept in a locked metal case, his back to her, his voice a low, lethal murmur. Ava, in the kitchen, was making tea, and she could only catch fragments. Too close. An access road, no. It is not a coincidence I want them. All of them in the warehouse. Now. He hung up. The silence he left behind colder than the snow outside. He turned, and the man who had been reading by the fire was gone. The boss was back. "I have to go," he said, his voice flat. He was already shrugging on his heavy coat. "Go where?" Ava's hand tightened on her mug. "Matteo, what is wrong?" "Business." The word was a wall. "Leo, there was a perimeter breach. A Sarkov patrol was spotted near the main road. They said they were hunting. They were lying. They found us," she whispered, the tea turning to acid in her stomach. "They are looking," he corrected, his voice hard. "They do not know where to look. Not yet, but they know I am not in the city. They know I am hiding something. Someone in my organization is talking. I am going to find out who—" He was moving, checking the clip on a sleek black pistol he pulled from a locked drawer, sliding it into a holster she had not known he was wearing. "You are going to talk to them?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He looked at her, his eyes flat and cold, the eyes she remembered from the club. "I'm going to end the conversation. Bolt the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone. The guard on the porch has his orders. You are safe here." He was gone. The sound of the heavy truck engine roaring to life, then fading, was the only sound, leaving the cabin in a sudden, terrifying silence. She was alone, with the quiet, older guard, who was now a visible presence on the front porch, his rifle leaning against the railing. She was safe. She was also a prisoner. The day dragged on. The silence of the cabin, once a comfort, was now a cage. She tried to read, but the words blurred. She tried to sleep, but her mind raced. He had not said when he would be back. Restless, she began to pace, her hands rubbing her belly. She tidied things that were already tidy. She refolded the blankets. She went into his room, the one he had given her, and looked in the closet. It was packed with men's clothes, all his size. He had been using this place for a long time. At the back of the closet, behind a hanging suit bag, a section of the wood paneling looked wrong. The grain was slightly off, a small, almost invisible gap. Her fingers, driven by a nameless, cold dread, pushed at it, a square of the wall, no bigger than a medicine cabinet, clicked and opened inward. It was not a hidden room. It was safe. A small, dark, recessed metal box. There was no lock, just a file, a single, thick, manila file. Her hands were shaking. She knew she should not. She knew she should close the small door, walk away, and pretend she had seen nothing. This was his world, the one he had promised to protect her from. She pulled the file out. She sat on the edge of the bed, the file heavy in her lap. Her name, Ava Delaney, was not written on it. The tab just said Iron Cross. She opened it. The first things she saw were grainy, black and white photographs, a man with hollow eyes and a rusty knife, a second, heavier man, sneering. It was them. The two men from the alley. Her breath hitched. She flipped the page. There was a report, typed, detailing their movements for the 3 days following the attack. Where they ate. Where they slept, a flop house on the east side. It included their names, their priors, a litany of petty, desperate crimes. Then there were more photos. The first man, the one with the knife, was in a police photograph, a morgue photo. His face was blue, his eyes open and empty. The report said there was an accidental overdose. The second man, the one who had grabbed her, was not in a morgue. The last photo was of him on his knees, in a place that looked like a warehouse. His face a mask of terror, blurred as if the camera had been shaking. The next page was blank, save for a single, typed word. Resolved. Ava's stomach turned. She ran to the small bathroom, her hand over her mouth, and was violently ill. This was not protection. This was extermination. The man who had saved her in the alley, the silent, suited stranger, had just been a scout. He had marked them. And Mateo, from his penthouse, had passed judgment. He had not just kept her safe. He had cleansed the world of the men who had dared to touch her. The moral line she had feared, the one she had tried to pretend did not exist, was not just real. He had crossed it, in her name, without her even knowing. She was still sitting on the bed, the file open, the room dark, when she heard the truck return. She did not move. She heard the heavy stomp of his boots on the porch, the door opening, the sound of his voice. Low, talking to the guard. The cabin door opened. Ava. He walked into the bedroom. He saw her, a pale shape in the dusk. He saw the open safe in the wall. He saw the file in her lap. He stopped, his broad shoulders slumping, the weariness of his day, the mole hunt, the violence he had just committed, rolled off him. "You should not have seen that," he said, his voice quiet. Ava's voice was dead, flat, empty. Who were they? Junkies, street trash. It does not matter. He moved to take the file from her. She flinched, pulling it away. Their names. They had names. This one. She held up the morgue photo, her hand shaking. Was Daniel. Mateo's face hardened. He put a knife to you. Ava. And him? She held up the other photo, the one of the man on his knees. What did you do to him? It says resolved. How did you resolve him? Mateo. He was silent. The silence of a king. You killed them, she whispered, and the words tasted like poison. That night at the club, that was your world. I could understand that. It was monsters fighting monsters. But this was my world. They were just desperate, and you had them executed. They hurt you, he said, his voice a low growl. They put their hands on you. They made you afraid. I could not let them live. It was a confession. It was the simple, horrifying truth. It was a law of his universe. You touch what is his. You cease to exist. I am not yours, she sobbed, the words tearing from her. I am not a thing you own, a thing you protect by killing. I am a person. And you made me. You made me the reason for this. You are a monster. She threw the file at him, the papers scattering across the floor. I cannot do this. I cannot be this. I cannot bring a child into this. She grabbed her coat, the one he had given her, and ran. She did not know where she was going. She just ran. Out the front door, past the stunned guard, off the porch, and into the woods. "Ava!" he roared, his voice thundering after her. She ran, her lungs burning, the icy air searing her throat. She did not know the woods. She just ran, following the sound of water. She stumbled through the snow, tripping on roots, until she burst through a stand of pines and found it, a river, black and churning, cutting through the white snow. She collapsed on the bank, her body too heavy, her grief too much. She sank to her knees, her face in her hands, and she wept. The rain from the night of the storm had turned to snow, and now a light. Cold rain began to fall again, mixing with the tears that streamed down her face. She did not hear him approach. He moved like a ghost in the woods he knew. She only knew he was there when his large, dark shape blocked out the gray sky. He knelt beside her in the mud and snow, his expensive coat soaking up the wet. "Ava," he said, his voice raw. "Go away," she choked, not looking at him. "Go away, you monster." "I know," he said, and his voice broke. "I became a monster to keep you safe. I did. I built an empire of all the worst parts of me, to make a wall. I thought it would keep you safe, but you never asked for a monster." She turned on him then, her grief exploding into a white-hot, physical rage. She hit him, her small, balled fists striking his chest, his shoulders. "I hate you," she screamed, each word a blow. "I hate you for what you are. I hate you for making me love you. I hate you for making me need you." He did not block her. He did not defend himself. He just knelt there, his face a mask of agony, and let her hit him. He took every blow, every sob-filled accusation. "You kill," she wept, her voice breaking. "You kill, and you cook pasta, and you touch my face, and I cannot tell them apart anymore." Her strength gave out. The blows became weaker, her fists barely connecting, until she was just clinging to the front of his coat, her head bowed, her body shaking with sobs that had no end. He wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her against him, his hand tangling in her wet hair. Holding her head to his chest, he held her tight, as if he could absorb her pain, her fear, her rage into his own body. He rocked her gently, back and forth, on the bank of the dark, cold river. He was not a boss. He was not a killer. He was just a man, holding the woman who was his entire world, after he had just finished destroying it. They returned to the cabin soaked, cold, and hollow. The guard looked at them, at Ava's tear-stained, pale face, at Mateo's haunted eyes, and turned away, marching back to his post. That night, the generator was still running, but Mateo did not turn on the lights. He built a fire, and they sat in front of it, wrapped in dry blankets, the room lit only by the flickering flames and a few candles he had placed on the mantel. The silence was different. It was not tense. It was not angry. It was an empty space, a void. Mateo spoke first, his voice rough, staring into the flames. "My mother," he said, and the words sounded rusty, unused. "She was beautiful, and she was weak, and the men she brought home were not kind." Ava watched him, her heart aching. "I was 8 years old. I came home from school. One of them was still there. She was on the floor. He was not moving. He told me to be a good boy and clean up the mess. I found a bottle, and I hit him. I hit him until my arm was tired, and he did not get up." He paused. The only sound, the crackle of the fire. Foster care after that. Juvie at 13, prison at 18. You learn there. You learn fast. There are only 2 kinds of people in the world. Ava, there are victims, and there are the people who make them. I looked at the men who ran that prison, the men who ran the streets, and I knew I would never be a victim again. I would be the man who owned the walls. I would be the monster. I built this empire out of all the pain, all the rage. I built it so no one could ever touch me. He turned to look at her, his eyes dark, reflecting the fire. "And then you walked into my club, and you were not afraid of me, and you touched me, and the walls did not matter." Ava felt her own tears, fresh but different, sliding down her cheeks. She saw him, not the boss, not the killer, but the 8-year-old boy, with a bottle in his hand, standing over a body. The boy who had been building a fortress ever since. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it on his, where it was clenched on his knee. His skin was rough, scarred. She took a breath. The new, fragile life inside her a counterweight to all the death. "Will you leave it?" she whispered. "For me? For the baby? Can you?" Mateo looked at her hand on his, then back at her face. His gaze was raw, filled with a new, terrifying hope and a deeper, more profound fear. "It is not a job, Ava," he said, his voice thick. "I am not a regional manager. It is a crown, and it is a cage. It is all I have ever been. I do not know how to walk away." He squeezed her hand, his grip desperate. "But I will try. For you. I will try." His promise to try was not an empty word. It was a declaration of war against himself. In the days that followed, the cabin became a command center, but not for the Empire. It was for its dissolution. Mateo was on the satellite phone for hours, his voice cold, his orders precise. He was not just moving assets, he was liquidating them. Shell corporations were folded, offshore accounts were emptied and closed, properties were sold to rivals for pennies on the dollar, a move so uncharacteristic it sent tremors through the Black Ridge underworld. He was not just pruning the branches, he was poisoning the roots. He was cutting the limbs off his own body, and the pain was evident in the new, deep lines etched around his mouth. On the 5th day of this self-dismantling, Leo arrived at the cabin. He came alone, his face a thundercloud. The guard on the porch, loyal to Mateo and no one else. Let him pass. Leo strode into the cabin without knocking, his eyes landing first on Ava, who sat by the fire, a blanket over her lap. His gaze was pure, unfiltered contempt. Then he looked at his boss. "What are you doing?" Leo's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "You are giving it away. 20 years, our life. You are setting it on fire and handing the matches to the Sarkovs." Mateo did not look up from the ledger he was studying. "It is my life. Leo, mine to burn." "It is ours," Leo snarled, taking a step closer. "I was with you when you had nothing but a name and a knife. We built this from the mud, and you are throwing it all away for her? For a waitress? For a condition?" Ava flinched, her hand going to her stomach. Mateo was on his feet in an instant, a blur of motion. He crossed the room and had Leo by the throat, slamming him against the heavy timber wall. The cabin shook. "You will not speak about her," Mateo whispered, his voice resonating with a finality that was more terrifying than any shout. "You will not look at her. The Empire is done. I am done. This is the end. Leo." Leo choked, his face reddening, but his eyes were defiant. He did not see a boss. He saw a man he did not recognize, a stranger bewitched, a king committing suicide. Mateo held him for a long, vibrating second, then released him, shoving him back. "Get out! It is finished! You are free!" "Free?" Leo laughed, a harsh, broken sound, rubbing his throat. "There is no free. Mateo, there is only power, and the lack of it. You are choosing the lack. You are choosing to be a target. You are choosing to be prey, and you are making her the bait. Get out." Leo stared at him. His oldest friend, his brother, his boss. He saw nothing of the man he had followed. He saw only a weakness. He will learn. Leo thought, his heart turning to stone. He is sick. He needs the cure. He needs to remember what happens when he is weak. Leo turned and left the cabin, his shoulders rigid. He got in his car and drove for a mile. Pulling over on the deserted access road, he took out a new, clean burner phone. He dialed a number he had known for years, the number of his most hated enemy. "It is Leo," he said, his voice dead. "I know where he is. I know what he is hiding. A cabin, north, on the river. He has one guard." He gave the coordinates. "Why?" The voice on the other end, Ivan Sarkov, asked, his suspicion thick. "He's not the man he was," Leo said. "He needs a reminder. You come, you make noise, you snap him out of it. He will be forced to fight. He will be forced to be the king again." There was a long silence. "You are a fool, Leo," Sarkov said and laughed. "But we will come." Leo threw the phone into the woods and drove back to the city. He had not betrayed his boss. He had saved him. He had started a fire that only the real Matteo Moretti could put out. 2 nights later, the ambush came. A blizzard had descended, the wind howling, the snow coming down in a thick white curtain that muffled the world. Inside, the cabin was a pocket of warmth. Ava was asleep in the bedroom. Mateo was on the sofa, a pistol on the table beside him, dozing but not sleeping. The first sound was not a sound at all. It was a lack of sound. The guard on the porch, a man named Russo, was supposed to check in, a quiet tap on the door, every hour. It was 5 minutes late. Mateo was awake, the gun in his hand, moving toward the door. In the space of a single heartbeat, he looked through the peephole. Russo was not there. The porch light was out. He moved silently to the bedroom. Ava, wake up. Get your coat, now. She was disoriented, her eyes wide. What, Mateo? No time. Get your coat. Stay in the bathroom. It has no windows. Do not come out. He turned to leave. Mateo, she cried, grabbing his arm. He looked at her, and his face was calm, the mask of the boss, the monster, but his eyes were terrified. Not for himself, for her. He kissed her. A hard, fast, desperate press of his lips. I promised I would protect you. Then he was gone, closing the bedroom door. The front door of the cabin exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a shotgun blast. 2 men, dressed in black winter tactical gear, swarmed in. Mateo was not there. He was in the kitchen, using the darkness. The first man raised his weapon, and Mateo fired twice from the shadows. The man collapsed. The second man returned fire, spraying bullets into the dark, shredding the kitchen cabinets, the sound of a deafening, percussive roar. Ava screamed from the bathroom, her hands over her mouth. Outside, more men were surrounding the cabin. The Sarkovs had not come to make noise. They had come to end the Moretti line. Mato heard them on the roof, on the porch. He was trapped. He moved back, toward the bedroom, firing as he went, driving the man in the entryway back. He slammed the bedroom door, locking it just as bullets splintered the wood. "Ava! The window!" he yelled, shoving the bed. "It is painted shut," she cried, pulling at it. He fired a round into the lock mechanism, shattering it, then kicked the window open. The blizzard screamed into the room. Go to the truck. The keys are in the ignition. I am not leaving you. Go!" he roared, turning to fire through the weakening door. He heard a cry from outside, a third man, and then a sound that made his blood freeze. A sharp, wet thwack against the outside wall, and a high, thin cry from Ava. He turned. She was not at the window. She was on the floor, clutching her arm, her face a mask of white, shocked pain. "Ava, it hurts," she whispered, looking at her shoulder. Blood, bright red, was already soaking through her nightgown. A stray bullet, a ricochet from outside. He was at her side in an instant, tearing the fabric. It was a graze, deep and bloody, but it had not hit bone. It was a flesh wound, and then she cried out again, a sound not of pain, but of a deep, primal shock. Her entire body tensed, her back arching, her eyes wide with terror found his. "Mateo," she gasped, her hands flying from her shoulder to her stomach. The baby. Oh, God. It is coming now." The shock, the bullet, the fall, it had started her labor. 7, almost 8 months, too early. Rage, pure and inhuman, flooded Mateo. He heard the men breaking through the bedroom door. He stood, putting his body between them and Ava, and he emptied his clip. A precise, controlled burst that dropped the 2 men in the doorway. He grabbed more clips from his nightstand, slammed a fresh one home. He heard more men outside. "Leo," he breathed, the name a curse. "Leo!" He scooped Ava into his arms. She screamed as her shoulder jostled. "I am sorry," he grunted, his voice raw. "Hold on." He burst out the shattered window, landing knee-deep in a snowdrift. Ava was a dead weight, her body already racked with another contraction. He sprinted for the truck, the blizzard providing a screen. A bullet snapped past his ear. He did not slow. He threw her into the passenger seat, ran to the driver's side, and peeled out. The truck's tires spinning, then gripping. The back window exploded, glass spraying the cabin. He hunched over the wheel, one hand on the dash, the other hand finding hers, his thumb rubbing circles on her skin. Breathe. Ava, breathe with me. You are safe. I have you. It hurts, she panted, her eyes squeezed shut, her face slick with sweat and snow. I know, I am sorry, I am so sorry, Mia Cara, I did this, I'm so sorry. He drove, not toward the highway, but deep into the back roads, a network of unmarked logging trails he had known since he was a boy, a place he used to run to. The storm was a blessing, covering their tracks, slowing any pursuit. The truck slammed through snowdrifts, the engine screaming. He drove for an hour, Ava's cries mixing with the howl of the wind. He was on the satellite phone, his voice a low, urgent command. Now, I need you now. The old place. My mother's place. Yes, bring it all. He hung up and gripped her hand tighter. She is coming, Ava, a midwife. The best. She is meeting us. Where? Where are we going? My mother's cottage, by the river, the place I told you about. No one knows, not even Leo. They arrived at a ghost of a place, a small, stone cottage, nearly invisible in the storm, just yards from the churning black river. It was abandoned, derelict, but the door was unlocked, inside. It was freezing, but a woman was already there, a stern-looking, older woman with a face like a weathered map, building a fire in the hearth. She had 2 large medical bags. Get her on the table, the midwife, Maria, ordered, not even looking at Mateo. Clean clothes in the bag, water on the fire. You, get out. I am staying, Mateo said, his voice a growl. You are not, Maria said, cutting Ava's bloody nightgown away. You are no use here. Get out, boil water. Mateo, Ava screamed, her hand finding his. Do not. Please, do not leave me. He looked at Maria, his eyes pleading. She sighed. Fine. But you do what I say. Hold her hand and be quiet. The next few hours were a blur of pain, fear, and blood. The cottage, lit only by the fire and 2 lanterns, became a small, sacred, terrifying stage. Ava was a warrior, her cries raw and real. Mateo was useless. He was a king with no power, a killer with no one to kill. He just held her hand, his forehead pressed to hers, whispering his apologies, his promises, his love, over and over, a desperate, broken prayer. One more, Cara, Maria commanded. Push, now. Ava gave a final, tearing scream, her body arching off the table, and then silence. A heavy, weighted silence, broken only by the sound of the wind. Why is it not crying? Ava wept, her voice thin. Maria was working, her hands fast. A tiny, blue-tinged form lay on the table. Come on, little one, Maria murmured, rubbing its back, and then a tiny, furious wail. A sound so thin it barely cut the air, but it was the sound of life. A girl, Maria said, her stern face breaking into a small smile. She wrapped the baby, no bigger than Mateo's 2 hands, in a clean blanket. She is small, but she is strong. Ava was sobbing, reaching. Maria laid the small bundle on her chest. She is so small, Ava whispered, touching the baby's tiny, perfect face. Mateo stood back, his body trembling, his hands shaking so badly he hid them behind his back. He had faced death 1,000 times. He had never been so terrified. Mateo, Ava whispered, her eyes heavy. He approached, as if walking to an execution. He looked at the tiny, red, wrinkled face, the tuft of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers. Hold her, Ava said. I cannot. My hands, they are bloody, tainted. Hold your daughter. Mateo. Maria lifted the small bundle and placed it in his arms. He had held guns. He had held money. He had held his own bleeding insides. He had never held anything this weightless and this heavy. The baby, his daughter, rooted against his chest, her small mouth making a soft noise. Matteo looked at her, at this perfect, innocent life, the walls he had built, the fortress of the monster, crumbled. It did not just crack, it disintegrated. His body was racked with a silent, shaking sob. His knees buckled. He sank into the chair by the fire, his shoulders heaving, his face buried in the blanket that held his child, his tears, hot and unstoppable, falling for the first time since he was 8 years old. He wept for the boy he was, the man he had become, and the father he had no idea how to be. Much later that night, the storm had passed, the world was silent, covered in white. Ava and the baby were asleep, bundled in every blanket they had, in the cottage's only bed. Mateo sat at the small, rickety table, by the light of a single candle. The river stone Ava had given him was in his left hand. To his right, he held a pen. He had a fresh burner phone and a stack of paper. He made one call to a number he had never used, a direct, untraceable line to the U.S. Attorney's Office. "I am Matteo Moretti. I am ready to talk." He hung up, took a deep breath, and began to write. He wrote everything: names, dates, accounts, warehouses, shipments. He named his lieutenants. He named his rivals. He named the corrupt politicians, the judges, the cops on his payroll. He's named Leo. He wrote for hours, dismantling his entire empire. Every brick, every body with his own hand. He would disappear. He would give them everything. In exchange for 2 lives, he would trade his crown for their freedom. He looked over at his sleeping wife, his sleeping child. It was not a choice. It was the only thing left to do. The first thing Ava noticed was the cold. She woke slowly, her body heavy and sore, her mind thick with the fog of exhaustion. The small stone cottage was silent, a profound, heavy silence that was completely different from the chaos of the night before. The fire in the hearth was dead. It was just a pile of cold, gray ash. Mateo was not beside her, a small, sharp sliver of panic, cold as the air, cut through her sleepiness. "Mateo?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The bed was empty. The blankets he had used were folded neatly at the foot of the bed. She looked at the small bundle nestled in the crook of her arm. Her daughter, Stella. The baby was sleeping, her tiny face peaceful, her breathing a soft, rhythmic whisper. She was real. The night had been real. "Mateo?" Ava called again, louder, sitting up. The movement sent a jolt of pain through her grazed shoulder and a deeper, dull ache through her body. She listened. The only sound was the wind, a low moan, and the distant, constant rush of the river. He was gone. She swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold stone floor. She wrapped a blanket around herself and the baby. Holding Stella tight to her chest, she walked into the small main room. His coat was gone from the peg. His boots were gone from the door. The satellite phone was gone. The papers he had been writing, the confession that had bought their lives, were gone. He had left them. A raw, keening sound built in her chest. She had known, had she not? She'd seen the finality in his eyes as he held his daughter. He had looked at them like a man memorizing a view he would never see again. He had made his choice. He had traded himself for them. Then she saw it. On the rickety table where he had sat, by the light of a single, burned-out candle, was a single, folded piece of paper. His confession was gone, but this was for her. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, shifting Stella to one arm. It was a page torn from the same legal pad. His handwriting, dark and sharp, filled the page. It was not a long letter. It was not an explanation. It was just a promise and a goodbye. "I regret nothing but losing you." Ava's knees gave way. She sank to the floor, the note clutched in her hand, her body curling protectively around her sleeping child. The sob that tore out of her was not one of fear. It was one of profound, absolute loss. He had done it. He had protected her from himself. A final, devastating act of love. He had cut himself out of their lives to keep them safe. "No," she whispered, her tears hitting the floor. "No, you do not get to do this." Panic, hot and urgent, replaced the grief. She had to stop him. She had to tell him they could find another way. She had to tell him that a life without him was not a life, but just a survival. She moved, her body clumsy with haste and pain. She found her own worn boots, shoved her feet into them. She wrapped Stella in every blanket she could find, creating a warm, safe cocoon, and clutched the bundle to her chest. She did not bother with her coat. She threw the cottage door open and ran. The world was a shock of white and blue. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured clean, buried under 2 feet of fresh, untouched snow. The sun was rising, hitting the snow and turning it into a blinding, diamond-bright landscape. She ran toward the river, the only landmark she knew. "Mateo!" she screamed, her voice sounding thin and small in the vast, cold emptiness. "Mateo!" She reached the riverbank, her lungs burning, her feet numb. The river was black and fast, a dark, angry scar in the white snow. The truck was gone. There were no footprints. The wind and the new snow had already erased any sign he had ever been there. There was just the river, the snow, and the silence. He was gone. She stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into her bones, her tears freezing on her cheeks, her daughter stirring, a small, muffled cry against her heart. He had left. He had chosen. He had saved them, and in doing so, he had lost them. At that same moment, 50 miles south, Matteo Moretti walked, unescorted, into a gray, concrete federal building. He was unarmed. His coat was open. He had not slept. He sat in a windowless room, across from a man in a rumpled suit who looked at him as if he were a ghost. "You are Matteo Moretti," the U.S. attorney said, stating the obvious. "I am," Matteo said, his voice hollow. He pushed the thick stack of papers across the table. "And this is my life." The attorney looked at the first page. His eyes widened. He looked back at Matteo, his suspicion warring with a sudden, predatory hunger. "What is this? A game?" "It is a trade," Matteo said, his voice flat. He pushed the gray river stone across the table. "You will lose this. It will be found in a federal evidence locker by a man I have already paid. That is how I will know the first part of the deal is done." "What deal?" "Her name is Ava Delaney. She is a civilian. She had a child last night, a girl. They are not to be touched. They are not to be named. They are not to be part of this. You will give them new identities, full, clean, and untouchable. You will give them a new life. Far from here, with a stipend that you will not trace, they will be ghosts. In exchange, I will give you everything. Everything. My organization, my rivals, the politicians, the police. I will burn the entire city of Blackridge to the ground. From the inside, I will testify. I will sign. I will give you the crown." The attorney stared at him. He saw no angle. He saw no trick. He saw a man who was already dead, negotiating the terms of his own funeral. "Full immunity and relocation for Ava Delaney and the child," the attorney said. The words, "a new reality." "In exchange for your full confession and testimony against the Moretti Syndicate and its associates, they are free," Matteo clarified, his eyes locking on the attorney's. Cold and absolute. "They are free, or I walk out of this room, and you spend the rest of your career chasing my shadow. You will never get this close again." "They are free," the attorney agreed, his hand already reaching for the phone. Matteo leaned back, the tension leaving his body. He closed his eyes, just for a second, and saw a tiny, red, wrinkled face. He felt a small, impossible weight in his arms. He had done it. He had kept his promise. He had protected them from himself. The snow melted, the spring came, washing the grit from the streets of Blackridge as the largest federal bust in the city's history dismantled an empire. The name Moretti became a legend, a whispered curse, a headline that slowly faded. Leo was arrested, his face a mask of shocked betrayal. The Sarkovs were crippled. The city, for a time, was quiet. Months passed, summer, then a cool, crisp autumn. In a small, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, a town of pine trees, clean air, and friendly, uncurious faces, a woman named Grace Martin pushed a stroller along a paved pathway. The path followed a river, but this river was wide and green and slow, a peaceful, life-giving artery. Ava, now Grace, had healed. The scar on her shoulder was a thin, white line, a story she would one day have to tell. She worked part-time at the local library, a job that was blissfully silent, surrounded by books and the smell of old paper. Her daughter, Stella, was 7 months old. She was healthy and bright and beautiful, With her father's dark, watchful eyes, Ava had made a life. It was the life she had dreamed of. Safe, normal, anonymous. She was a mother. She was at peace. But every day, in the late afternoon, she came to the river. She would sit on a wooden bench and watch the water, her heart aching with a low, constant thrum of loss. She had her freedom. She had her child. But the cost had been the man who had given them to her. She did not know if he was alive or in prison or dead. The federal government had kept its word. Ava Delaney and her association with Matteo Moretti had been erased today. The air was cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. Stella was asleep in her stroller. Ava sat on the bench, watching the current. She felt it before she saw it, the same prickle on her skin she had felt all those months ago. Outside the flower shop, the sensation of being watched. But this was not the cold, predatory gaze of a stranger. This felt familiar. She turned her head, slowly. He was standing 20 yards away, near a grove of tall birch trees, half hidden in the long shadows of the late afternoon. It was not Matteo Moretti, the king of Blackridge, in his tailored coat and his armor of power. This man was thin. He wore a simple, worn flannel shirt and jeans. His hair was shorter. There was a new, jagged scar that ran from his temple down his jaw, a stark, white reminder of the price he had paid. He looked weathered. He looked free. He'd been in witness protection. He'd given his testimony. And then, as the attorney had feared, he had disappeared. He had escaped his protectors, his jailers, and had crossed a continent. A fugitive from the very system he had empowered. He had chosen a life on the run with her over a safe life without her. Ava's heart stopped. She did not breathe. She could not move. This was the ghost she had mourned. This was the man she had loved. He did not rush toward her. He took one slow, hesitant step, then another, his eyes never leaving her face. He looked at her. Then his gaze dropped to the stroller, to the sleeping child, his daughter, and his face. That scarred, hard face, crumpled. Ava felt the tears finally come, not in a sob, but in a silent, hot flood. She had been holding her breath for 7 months, and it finally came out in a quiet, shuddering exhale. He stopped a few feet from her, as if afraid she would run, as if he were a phantom that a single, sharp noise might dispel. He looked broken and whole, and he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He sank to his knees, on the damp earth by the riverside, his gaze fixed on her face. He was no longer a king. He was not a boss. He was just a man, kneeling before his entire world. He opened his mouth, his voice a low, rough rasp she thought she would never hear again. "I regret nothing but losing you." Ava did not speak. The words were not necessary. All the pain, the fear, the blood, the sacrifice, it all condensed into this one single, impossible moment. She stood, reached into the stroller, and gently lifted her sleeping daughter. Holding Stella against her chest, she closed the distance between them. She did not slap him. She did not yell. She just opened her arms. She embraced him, pulling his head to her chest, her other hand coming up to cradle his scarred face. She held him, with their daughter, their life, their future, pressed between them, a living, breathing shield against the past. His arms came around them both, his grip desperate, his body shaking, his face buried in her hair. He held his family for the first time, not in a storm-wrecked cottage, but in the peaceful light of an autumn afternoon. They were free. They were scared. They were marked by the fire they had walked through, forever bound by the love and the sacrifice that had finally brought them home. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment. For more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. We want to hear your thoughts, so please share them in English.